This is lesson 5 of our discussion of critical theory relative to the political trends we're seeing in the United States today. That's politics with a small p, meaning the interaction of people within a social community, not the politics of elections, winners and losers. Before we proceed, I want to comment on the one feedback item made over the past 4 lessons. The feedback was to the effect that liberalism is mental illness, and I don't think it is. See, we embarked on our first ever experiment with liberalism about 240 years ago. It had never been done before. For the past 3 weeks, we have discussed the tenets of liberalism to round out our discussion of politics as a comparison to the emerging dominant governance model, critical theory, also called critical inquiry. Liberalism, the governance model reflected in the U.S. Constitution, has had a good run, and I grieve to see its supersession. Because of that sense of loss, I want to continue our discussion of liberalism, probing a little bit deeper. Let's start with a comparison of liberalism to authoritarian models, whether monarchies or theocracies or oligarchies. Human society has had plenty of experience with authoritarian governance. It's kind of what we default to when things get tough. With only a couple of exceptions, ancient Greece and the Roman Republic come to mind, almost all human experience with governance has been authoritarian. And relative to any authoritarian governance model, liberal governance is unquestionably complex. Authoritarian governments are much more simple and can turn on a dime relative to liberal governance. We can see this when we look at our Constitution, the complex governance structure it established for us, and our history since its founding some 240 years ago. The common structure of our systems of governance include extensive systems of enumerated and separated powers, bicameral legislatures, checks and balances across branches of government and even across levels of government. And this concept of fidelity to the rule of law, that we follow the laws that are passed and that all of us are subject to the laws that are passed. These structures are complex and slow. Paraphrasing George Will in his 1992 book Restoration, I prefer to say our government is deliberate by design. This inefficiency was tolerable to classical liberals like John Adams and George Washington because their contemporary society was largely agrarian. The pace of life was slow as horse-drawn transportation. And for them, the purpose of the government they were establishing was first and foremost to protect the ability of the people, individually and collectively, to govern themselves. So it's for this reason that I prefer liberal governance. See, for me, getting things done quickly and efficiently, except in designated times of national crisis, are of much less importance than the preeminent objective of our Constitution to protect the ability of the people to govern themselves. The wisdom of the founders, as described in the Constitution, was that for people to govern themselves, governance responsibilities and authorities should be placed primarily at the individual level. Their wisdom was that self-governance necessarily demands that the role of other levels of government be limited and listed, enumerated. More next week as we continue our deeper review of liberalism.